Hello, YouTube, and welcome back to another book review from me, your host, Logan Albright. Today I'm talking about a book that I've wanted to read for many years, and I don't know why I never got around to it, but I finally, it was on my radar. It was something that I was just interested in. It sounded like it was going to be right up my alley, and I finally got around to reading it. The book is Melmoth the Wanderer by Charles Maturin. He's an Irish writer writing in the early 19th century. This book was published in 1820, and it sort of comes at the late period, almost the tail end of the Gothic literature movement, which started in the late 18th century, carried over into the 19th century. And I like Gothic things, and it sounded like the kind of book that I would really enjoy. I didn't know too much about it, but the basic kind of idea behind it is sort of a Faustian bargain idea of a character who has traded his soul for immortal life or long life and knowledge and that sort of thing. And I found that really interesting, and I like the story of Faust, and I like a lot of those type of stories, and I like Gothic things a lot, so I thought I would really enjoy it. So I picked up this edition, which is a hardcover from Legatus Press, which I think is sort of a print-on-demand thing. It's not like a real publisher. And I liked it because it's beautiful hardcover, and it's got illustrations in there, which is nice. It does have some errors. The most glaring is in the table of contents, where you see the different parts. Part 4 is labeled as Part 6 because they don't understand how Roman numerals work. So that's what you get with print-on-demand things. But I wanted a nice, durable copy because I figured I would be referring to it a lot and going back to it because I had a hunch that it was going to become one of my favorite books. And so I was excited to read it, and I finally did. Now, the story of Melmoth the Wanderer is basically, it starts off with this young man, John Melmoth, who is going to visit his dying uncle to get his inheritance. And he visits his uncle, and he's given a portrait and a manuscript and a set of cryptic instructions relating to an ancestor of his, also named Melmoth. His uncle was also named Melmoth, so there's 3 characters in here called Melmoth. And the story is kind of told in flashbacks about the life of this Melmoth the Wanderer, who's turns out has been alive for hundreds of years, and shows up on the family members' deathbeds to kind of mock them, and shows up in tragic situations all over the world. And it's this narrative is sort of divided into sub-stories that are nested within each other. And this was a problem for me because I didn't know what was coming, and it sort of threw me off, and my expectations were thwarted. And I think if you go into it with the right expectations, you can really enjoy it, but I was frustrated with it because my expectations were not calibrated to what type of book it was going to be. So, for example, shortly into the book, there's a shipwreck, and Melmoth goes out, the young Melmoth, the main narrator character, goes out and rescues a Spaniard from the shipwreck, and he nurses him back to health, and the Spaniard starts telling his story about where he came from. And it's like bracketed off, and it's called The Spaniard's Tale. And so I was like, okay, I'm enjoying this book so far. I'm interested in the characters. I'm interested in the story. I got to put up with the Spaniard's Tale, and then we'll get back to the main story. And then the Spaniard's Tale goes on for like 150 pages, and it just goes on and on and on and on and on. And then another character in the Spaniard's Tale starts telling a story, and you got to hear that story. And I was like, I kept just waiting for the main story to resume. And I was like, when is the Spaniard going to shut up and finish his tale, and we can get back to the main story? And that was a mistake on my part because the Spaniard's Tale is the main story. This is structured a little bit like the Arabian Nights, in that there's nested stories within each other, and each story tells a little bit about the character Melmoth the Wanderer, and you find out a little bit about him in each story. And that's what the story is. It's almost a set of short stories around the same theme. But I kept expecting the story to end and to go back to the main character, the young Melmoth, and find out what was going to happen to him, and it never happens. So I found that really frustrating. And I think if you know that going in and you expect it to be that way, you won't be as frustrated by it as I was, and you'll get to enjoy it more. That being said, it was a difficult read. I haven't read a lot of early 19th century literature in a while. I've kind of spoiled myself on reading more modern stuff. And so to kind of get into the mindset of being able to read and understand this much more complex style of writing than we have now, much longer sentences, much deeper vocabulary, much less action in general, more description. It took me a while to kind of get into that mindset. And so I struggled with it for a bit. But I did really like the book quite a lot because it contains so many of these like Gothic tropes that I just find so appealing. There's, windswept, craggy, stony cliffs above the ocean. There's ruined castles and decaying manors. There's old people on their deathbeds. There's monasteries that are in decay, and then sinister monks that are populating them. There's black magic and pacts with the devil. There's all kinds of that like great stuff, which I just love. And I love the kind of these Gothic tropes that were popularized around this time period. And this is considered one of the very greatest Gothic novels. It was influential on people like Oscar Wilde. The Picture of Dorian Gray is supposedly inspired by it. And it was influential on a whole bunch of kind of post-Gothic writers. But it's a really enjoyable book, and the language it's written in, the author uses very colorful metaphors, and he uses a lot of great kind of archaic vocabulary that really evokes that kind of Gothic sense. And so I really like that aspect of it. One other thing that I wish was a little bit different in it is I wish you got a little bit more of like puzzle pieces to piece together the story of Melmoth as in the various nested tales as it goes along. You don't get so much of that. You kind of get the same appearance of Melmoth over and over again, and you don't really learn too much about his backstory or his character until the very end. And I'd like it to unfold a little bit more gradually. That would be nice, but it doesn't really happen that way. My understanding is that the publisher was sort of putting pressure on Charles Maturin to get this done, and that he ended up rushing it, and that's why it ends somewhat abruptly. I won't spoil the ending, but all these narratives kind of come to a head at the same time, and then it just is over. And you get a little bit more detail about Melmoth and what his deal was, but you get the sense that it just is a little bit truncated. Like this should have gone on a little bit longer and had more detail than what was going on. So it's a little bit of a frustrating read because there's much about it that I really love and that it really appeals to my sensibilities. And I really wanted to love this novel and have it be one of my favorites that I read over and over again. And there's part of it that is, but on the other hand, there's undeniable shortcomings of the book. I think that the way that it's structured is not ideal. It's sort of frustrating, and I just don't really like stories that are structured within these nested stories like that. I want a more linear narrative for the most part. I've never actually gotten all the way through Arabian Nights for exactly this reason. It's just too hard to keep track of what's going on in all these different nested stories. So that's a little bit of a shortcoming. The hasty ending is a little bit of a shortcoming. So, I can't unreservedly say it's like the greatest novel ever, which I was really hoping I would be able to do because it does seem right up my alley. But it is good. It is good, and I did enjoy it, and I probably will read it again at some point. But it kind of inspired me to want to delve into this Gothic genre a little bit more. I've read a few books in the genre. I've read most notably Matthew Lewis's The Monk, which is great. I really love Matthew Lewis as the monk. I've read some of the later stuff that was inspired by it, Frankenstein, Dracula. I've read Nathaniel Hawthorne's novels. I've read Poe, obviously. All those people who were kind of inspired by the Gothic. But the earlier stuff, the late 18th century stuff, I haven't read too much of, with the exception of I read Anne Radcliffe's The Romance of the Forest. But she's got several other books which are very influential in the genre as well. And there's a couple very early vampire stories that predate Dracula that I want to read. So I got a copy of The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole, and I intend to read that next. It's very short. Because I want to kind of do a deep dive into the Gothic subgenre and see what it's all about and really get to be knowledgeable about it, because I'm enjoying it. And it's good practice for me to go back and read earlier writing, because I think you get used to having a shorter attention span and reading easier to read modern books, and forcing yourself to read older literature kind of sharpens you up a little bit and gets you used to reading longer, more difficult passages, which is good for your mind. It's good for your attention span. I'm reading actually Bleak House by Charles Dickens right now, which I don't know how long it's going to take me to finish because it's 1,000 pages long. But again, it's nice to kind of delve back into that world, because I used to read a lot of 19th century literature, and then I kind of gave it up for a while in favor of more modern fantasy and science fiction and stuff. And I want to go back and read more of that. So if you are interested and know anything about the Gothic literature subgenre, please recommend books to me in the comments below. I'd like to know what I should read next. Like I said, I'm going to read The Castle of Otranto, and I've read The Romance of the Forest, but any other books from like late 18th century, I'd love to delve into that and really become knowledgeable about the genre. So please give me your recommendations in the comments down below. And then if you enjoyed my review of Melmoth the Wanderer, I hope you liked the video and subscribe to the channel. Let me know what you thought of the book. If you've read it, if you want to read it, if you have any questions about it, happy to answer those. Like I said, a difficult read, a frustrating read, but ultimately very satisfying. And I really was, by the end of it, I was pretty sucked into it and enjoyed it. So that's my thoughts on that. I'll be back again next week with another book review for your viewing pleasure. And I hope you all are doing well. And I thank you so much for being with me here and watching. Hope to see you next time. I've been your host, Logan Albright, and I will catch you later. Goodbye.